Hello, welcome to Moody Blooms. I'm Mary Ellen, and today we're going to be discussing the jade plant. Lately I've been getting a lot of direct messages from Instagram from many of you about your dying jades. And honestly, jade is one of the easiest succulents to keep alive. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to propagate your jade, how to care for it, and what to do if it is dying. These are a few cuttings that I've taken from my plant, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm also going to show you how to make an arrangement with these little cuttings. Just set them right into the soil. Now these have calloused over for a few days, so they'll be just fine. And I just leave them in here until they actually root. Another thing I like to do to make sure they stay secure is to add some rocks. And that just kind of holds them in place so they don't tip out. Once they root, they'll be just fine. Another one of my favorite soil toppers is sea glass. I love collecting them at different beaches, and my husband teases me and says that I have a hobby collecting trash and how cute it is, but I don't think it's funny. I think it looks so good on top of the plants, so just my quick tip for the day. A cute little pot of jade and just a few cuttings on top, and I'm going to show you how to get those cuttings.
Here is one of my beautiful jade plants, or officially known as Crassula Ovata. These plants are native to South Africa and Mozambique. Due to their easygoing nature, jade plants can do well both indoors and outdoors. These succulents do well on windowsills, desks, tabletops, under plant lights, and they thrive outdoors well. Jade plants might be one of the most common and popular succulent plants out there. Its popularity as a houseplant initially rose due to the fact that it needs very little care to survive and can endure in most indoor conditions. They are recognized for their thick, fleshy, shiny, smooth leaves that grow in opposite pairs. Leaves range in color from dark jade green in the shade of red on the edges when exposed to direct or full sunlight. Like aloes, many crassulas will stress beautifully to shades of red, yellow, and orange. Sun makes the difference. In low light, even the reddest shades will revert to green. Their branches also thicken with age. Known to some as money plant, the money tree, or lucky plant, you can understand the reason for its popularity based on its common names. So, are jade plants lucky? Known in some cultures as a lucky plant, jade plants are considered auspicious in feng shui. They are commonly found in storefronts, businesses, as well as people's homes. The deep green leaves resemble the mineral jade, which has long been used in feng shui as a symbol of wealth and prosperity. The mineral jade is also associated with healing, balance, and harmony. Jade plants are also referred to as friendship trees and are commonly given as gifts to friends and family for housewarming and such. You can definitely consider yourself lucky if you own one or more of these beauties. Jade plants are forgiving plants and easy to care for. They are resilient and hardy, which makes them a great choice for a starter or beginner plant. I always suggest this plant to a beginner succulent lover, as it's very hard to kill. It is a succulent plant that requires very little water to survive in the summer and even less in the winter. Therefore, it is susceptible to overwatering. If placed in the sun, it can garnish a pink or bright red tinge around the leaves. In extreme cases, the green color of the plant is completely lost and is replaced by faded yellow. This is a direct response by the plant system to protect itself from harsh sunlight by producing carotenoid pigments. If kept indoors, make sure the jade plant is receiving adequate sunlight. Jade plants kept indoors or in the shade maintain a deep emerald or dark green on their leaves. You'll know if it's not receiving adequate sunlight by the way they grow. They will start stretching towards the sun and become long and leggy, a process called etiolation, when they don't receive enough sunlight. If kept indoors, find a bright spot in your home. If you find that the jade is not doing well and appears to be stretching, you need to move it to a brighter location or consider using grow lights to provide adequate lighting. Here's one of my jade plants that I had indoors in a dark room. It was just a pot of some cuttings, and honestly, I kind of forgot about it. As you can see, there is a large space between each leaf, compared to this plant that receives adequate sunlight. Generally speaking, jade plants, like most succulent plants, need at least 5 to 6 hours a day of bright sunlight to grow properly. If kept by a window that receives bright, intense sun, especially afternoon sun, the leaves might experience sunburn until acclimated to the intense sunlight. To avoid this, gradually increase the amount of intense sun it receives. Jade plants prefer plenty of sun, but direct sunlight, especially intense afternoon sun, can burn the leaves of the plant. You will see sunburn spots on the leaves when this happens. To prevent this from happening, you can move the plant to a location where it receives plenty of bright morning sun as opposed to afternoon sun. Morning sun is less intense than the afternoon sun and is preferred by most succulents. If you can't move the plant and it receives full afternoon sun, try to provide some shade until it gets used to the intense sun. Increase sun exposure slowly to prevent sun damage. Once acclimated to full sun, it should be able to withstand the intense afternoon heat. But even an acclimated, mature jade plant can still suffer from sunburn during a heat wave or when the temperature gets intensely hot over the summer. When this happens, it's usually not detrimental to the plant and the plant usually recovers without a problem. The sunburnt leaves will eventually fall off as new leaves grow. Like aloes, many crassulas will stress beautifully to shades of red, yellow, and orange. Sun makes a difference. In low light, even the reddest shades will revert to green. As for soil, jade plants prefer a potting mix that is fast draining. They do not like to sit in wet soil for too long. If the soil stays constantly wet, the plant becomes susceptible to fungus, diseases, and root rot. Use a well-draining potting mix. You can augment the potting mix by adding pumice or perlite to the potting or cactus mix. I usually use a cactus mix and combine it with perlite for better drainage. Proper watering techniques go hand in hand with the right potting mix. Just as the soil needs to be fast draining, jade plants do not like to sit in wet soil for too long. It's important to have the right potting mix and watering techniques for the plant to thrive. As a rule of thumb, only water the jade plants when the top inch of the soil feels dry to the touch. Wait for the soil to dry out in between waterings. This is largely dependent on the climate you live in and the weather. My foolproof way to watering is to use a moisture meter. I highly recommend this to any newbie succulent lover. The most common cause of plant death is overwatering, and it really helped me when I was new to succulents. There's a link for one that I use below. Jade plants are very forgiving plants. Since they store their water in their leaves and trunks, they can go for a long time without water, especially mature jade plants. If you forget to water your jade, their leaves begin to flatten, meaning their water reserves are starting to run low. Give them a good drink and they'll perk right back up. Watering indoors also differs slightly from outdoors because the temperature and light are more controlled, but the same rule still applies whether the top inch of the soil feels dry. You may not need to water as much indoors because the sunlight is not as intense. The thicker the stem, the more drought resistant the plant. Pests seldom are a problem. The biggest challenge with these simple succulents is protecting them from temperatures below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. I occasionally have mealybug issues with my jade plants, and I use a diluted alcohol solution to spray on them, and that usually is a fix. That works great. I get a lot of questions about fertilizing. Now keep in mind that jade plants are not finicky plants. I consider them to be one of the hardiest succulent plants. If the potting mix is fresh, fertilizing is usually not necessary. Once the plant has been sitting in the same potting mix for a couple of years without repotting, then you'll need to replenish the nutrients that the plant would be otherwise getting from the soil. You can use a standard balanced fertilizer for houseplants or a specialized fertilizer designed for succulents and cacti. Dilute the amount of fertilizer recommended on the package. There is a link to my favorite fertilizer down below. Be wary of overfeeding jade plants, as they are not heavy feeders and do not require that much. It's best to feed during the growing season, which is in the spring, summer, and fall seasons. Fertilizing about once a month during the growing season is a good place to start. Decrease fertilizing as the end of growing season approaches around mid-fall. I also get a lot of questions on how to get the jade plant to bloom. While getting your jade plant to bloom is not a priority, it's definitely a treat to see happy flowers blooming from it. I have lots of jade plants that bloom every year. There's no exact science on how to get them to bloom, but generally, if you keep your plant healthy and happy by providing proper care and nutrients, as we discussed already, the plant will naturally bloom when it's ready. To encourage blooms, the plant needs to be kept in an environment that mimics their natural habitat. This can be achieved by keeping them cool and dry in the winter months. You need to decrease watering the plant to a minimum. and only water when the soil is dry, but not bone dry. Now let's propagate. Jade plants are one of the easiest plants to grow and propagate. They can be propagated by a stem or a leaf cutting. Make sure to take the whole leaf, including the base, or the leaf will not survive. I'm going to make some cuttings on this large green pot of jade. I'm going to go right in between the two leaves and make a cut, making sure to leave just enough room for there to grow some roots on the bottom of that stem. I'm also going to make another cut right about here, in between the two leaves. So a nice healthy cutting. Another cut right here, just above those leaves. And we'll get some new growth, hopefully, out of the sides of that where we cut. Typically I get about 2 shoots that come out. So this is the original pot before any cuttings were done. Nice and healthy, nice and full. Doesn't need to be trimmed, but just for demonstration's sake, I'm going to go ahead and show you the before and after. So here's the pot on the left, the original pot before any cuttings were made. The pot on the right is after we've made several cuttings. Still nice and full, nice healthy plant, and you can hardly even tell that we made any cuttings. So this is another pot that I have. It had 3 cuttings in it, and one of them is growing exceptionally taller than the other 2. So I'm going to make a cut right about there, and now it's nice and even and a little more symmetrical. Now here's my terracotta pot that had several cuttings in it, and I left it inside in a dark room, and it is elongated and it needs to be trimmed because I want it to grow more compact and more full. So my first cutting right here. Now I'm going to make another cutting a little bit below that, right about here. So as you can see on this cutting, on the top was cut off and on the bottom. So we got 2 cuttings out of that one plant. Another cut right here. And one more on this one. Here's another plant that was also left in a dark room, got really leggy, kind of forgot about it. I'm gonna make some cuts. You always want to make sure to leave at least a leaf or 2 on the bottom stem. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill all my cuttings into my terracotta pot to make it a little bit more full. Make sure they're standing upright. We're gonna add all our cuttings from our other pots that we trimmed. Now, of course, we want it to be nice and full like this pot on the left. So we're gonna try to add a little bit more cuttings to this to make it nice and full. Here's the final product after we've added all of our cuttings. Again, this had several cuttings to begin with. We trimmed them down and then we added a bunch of new cuttings that will hopefully root and thrive. So here's a before and after. This is the original pot on the left that had the leggy cuttings in it, and we went ahead and trimmed it, and then we added a bunch of cuttings on the pot on the right so it can grow nice and full and healthy. Make sure to put the cuttings aside for a day or 2 until the cut part has completely healed. You want it to callus over. You can dip the cuttings or leaves in rooting hormone, and that will speed up the root growth, but totally optional as jade plants reproduce like crazy. Next, stick the cuttings in a well-draining potting soil mix. You can either stick the leaf cuttings in soil or lay them flat on the soil. Make sure to keep the cuttings and leaves away from direct sunlight. I typically have roots form on my cuttings in about 2 weeks' time. The stem cuttings will be fully rooted in about 6 to 8 weeks. Tug at the stem, and if they do not come out easily from the soil, the stems have rooted. Leaf cuttings take longer because you need to wait for the new plant to sprout and for it to grow bigger. The whole process may take anywhere from 8 weeks to a few months for the leaf propagation. I also like to make cuttings on my jade plants to increase growth. As you can see here where I cut off before, in this section you can see where it's darker, that's where a cutting has been taken previously, and see how there's new shoots coming out on either side. I'll show you a couple other examples. Increase sunlight once the plants are established. I water once every 10 days or so when the plants are mature, sometimes even less than that. I've propagated jade plants in different ways, from leaves to stem cuttings and even water propagation. All of them worked for my jade plants, but my favorite method of propagation is through stem cuttings because it's the easiest and I get the highest success rate from it. One of my favorite ways to rescue a dying succulent is to use water propagation. As you can see here on this golem jade, it's wilting and not looking so hot. This cutting looked almost identical to the shriveled cutting, and it's been in water for a bit now, and look how healthy and plump those leaves are doing. It's a fast, easy fix that I use when I have any of my succulents suffering. If you have any questions, please comment below, or you can direct message me on Instagram. Please subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new videos. I would love a big thumbs up from you if you found this video helpful. Thanks so much for joining us on Moody Blooms.